Today, we're diving into the mind of one of the most terrifying individuals in history, a name that strikes fear and leaves you questioning the darkness of the human soul. This person didn't just commit heinous crimes. They left a trail of mystery, and their story haunts anyone who dares to look deeper. In this video, we'll uncover the chilling details of their methods, their motives, and the terrifying thought process behind their actions. Get ready for a journey into darkness, one you won't forget. The chilling story of Jeffrey Dahmer, inside the mind of a monster. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the most infamous and chilling serial killers in American history. His crimes, spanning from 1978 to 1991, shocked the world due to their brutality, depravity, and the horrifying nature of his actions. Dahmer's story is not just about the murders themselves, but also about the dark, twisted psychology that led to them. His life and crimes have been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and movies, with a particular focus on his childhood, the rise of his violent tendencies, and the sheer horror of his actions. In this story, we will explore the life of Jeffrey Dahmer, the history of his crimes, the aftermath of his arrest, and the psychological factors that may have contributed to his horrifying behavior. Early life and background. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. His parents' marriage was troubled, marked by constant arguments and eventual divorce when Jeffrey was just 18 years old. Jeffrey's early life seemed relatively normal at first, but as he grew older, signs of his troubled nature began to emerge. His mother was reportedly mentally unstable, and his father, though well-meaning, was often absent due to his career in chemistry. Jeffrey spent much of his childhood feeling neglected and isolated, which may have contributed to his emotional instability and growing sense of alienation. Dahmer's earliest signs of abnormal behavior began during his childhood. He developed a fascination with dead animals, which he would often dissect and mutilate. He would collect animal bones, sometimes keeping them in jars or boxes in his room. These early acts of cruelty toward animals were a precursor to his later, more violent tendencies. Dahmer's childhood was filled with periods of loneliness and isolation, as he struggled to connect with his peers and became increasingly withdrawn. Throughout his teenage years, Dahmer began drinking heavily, and by the time he was in high school, he had become an alcoholic. Despite his alcoholism, he was described as a class clown who could be charming and funny at times. However, there were also moments of intense anger and disturbing behavior. Dahmer's behavior became more erratic as he aged, and his social interactions became more strained. He later admitted that his sexual desires had begun to take on a darker nature during his teenage years, including fantasies of dominance and control over his victims. At the age of 16, Dahmer committed his first known murder, although it would take years before he would confess to it. The first murder. In 1978, when Dahmer was just 18 years old, he committed his first murder. The victim was Stephen Hicks, a 19-year-old hitchhiker whom Dahmer picked up on a road near his childhood home. Dahmer lured Hicks to his house, where they drank beer together. At some point during the evening, Dahmer attacked Hicks with a dumbbell, strangled him, and then dismembered his body. Dahmer later disposed of the remains by boiling them in chemicals and grinding them into powder. This horrific act would become the blueprint for many of his subsequent murders, but at the time, it was an isolated event that Dahmer tried to bury in his past. After this murder, Dahmer briefly joined the army, but was discharged after less than 2 years due to his alcohol problem. His drinking continued, and he struggled to find stability in his life. He lived a transient lifestyle, moving between different apartments and engaging in occasional, often violent, sexual encounters with strangers. Despite the dark urges that plagued him, Dahmer did not immediately continue his killing spree. It wasn't until the mid-1980s that he would begin to actively hunt his victims. By 1987, Dahmer had already committed several murders, although many of his actions were not discovered until much later. The most disturbing aspect of Dahmer's killing spree was his ability to blend into society and lead an outwardly normal life. He held jobs at various places, including a chocolate factory and a variety of low-wage positions, but nobody suspected him of being capable of such horrifying crimes. Dahmer's method of choosing victims remained consistent. He targeted young men, often from marginalized groups such as the LQB+ community and people of color. Dahmer lured his victims into his apartment with promises of money, drugs, or other incentives. Once inside, he would drug and sexually assault them before killing them. His method of killing was usually by strangulation or blunt force trauma. After killing his victims, Dahmer would dismember their bodies and engage in acts of necrophilia. He would sometimes keep parts of his victims, such as their skulls or genitalia, as trophies or for later sexual use. The police were unaware of Dahmer's activities for years, despite several close calls. In one instance, a young boy named Konorak Sintha Somphone managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and ran into the street, but Dahmer convinced the police that the boy was his drunken lover and that the situation was nothing to worry about. The police, mistakenly believing Dahmer's story, returned the boy to him, where he was subsequently murdered. Dahmer's ability to manipulate and charm those around him helped him evade suspicion for much longer than he should have. The discovery of the crimes. In 1991, Dahmer's reign of terror came to an end. On July 22, 1991, one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape Dahmer's apartment and flag down 2 police officers. Edwards led the officers back to Dahmer's apartment, where they discovered photographs of dismembered bodies and body parts. The officers arrested Dahmer, and the full extent of his crimes was revealed. Dahmer's apartment was a scene of horror, with human remains scattered throughout the apartment and even in the refrigerator. During his interrogation, Dahmer confessed to the murders of 17 men and boys over a span of 13 years. He explained in chilling detail how he lured his victims, killed them, and disposed of their bodies. Dahmer's confession was deeply unsettling, as it revealed not only his gruesome actions, but also the cold, calculated manner in which he carried them out. He expressed little remorse for his crimes, describing his actions as a means of fulfilling his desire for control and dominance over his victims. The trial and conviction. Dahmer's trial began in 1992, and it quickly became a media sensation. His defense team argued that Dahmer was insane at the time of the murders, citing his history of mental illness and his disturbing fantasies. However, the prosecution maintained that Dahmer was fully aware of his actions and should be held accountable for his crimes. Ultimately, Dahmer was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite his conviction, Dahmer's life behind bars was far from peaceful. He was placed in solitary confinement for his own safety, as many inmates wanted to take revenge on him for his crimes. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was attacked and beaten to death by a fellow inmate named Christopher Scarver, who claimed that he had been disgusted by Dahmer's behavior. Dahmer's death brought an end to one of the most notorious killing sprees in American history, but the shock of his crimes continues to haunt the public. Psychological profile and legacy. The case of Jeffrey Dahmer raises many questions about the psychology of serial killers. Dahmer's life was filled with signs of emotional and psychological disturbance, and his crimes were driven by deep-seated urges for control, domination, and sexual gratification. His disturbing behavior toward animals, his early sexual fantasies, and his intense feelings of isolation and alienation may have contributed to the development of his violent tendencies. Dahmer himself admitted that he was motivated by a desire to possess his victims and make them part of him. His crimes were both sexually motivated and driven by a deep need for control. Though Dahmer's actions were utterly horrific, understanding the psychological factors that led to his behavior is crucial in the study of serial killers. His case is often used as an example of how childhood trauma, mental illness, and isolation can combine to create a dangerous and violent individual. However, Dahmer's story also highlights the importance of recognizing the signs of abnormal behavior and the need for intervention before such violence occurs. Dahmer's crimes have left a lasting legacy in both popular culture and criminal psychology. His story continues to be studied and discussed in documentaries, books, and movies, and his name remains synonymous with depravity and evil. The chilling details of his actions and the coldness with which he executed his crimes serve as a grim reminder of the depths of human darkness. In conclusion, Jeffrey Dahmer's life and crimes are among the most disturbing in modern history. His ability to maintain a normal facade while committing unspeakable atrocities shocked the world and continues to fascinate and horrify people today. His story serves as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked psychological disorders and the importance of recognizing the warning signs of violent behavior before it spirals into something even more horrific.